Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to give it just about a minute for folks to join the webinar, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we'll get started with just some introductions and some housekeepings. Welcome everybody to today's webinar on the truth about sex trafficking, a survivor perspective, presented by national expert Tina Frundt and hosted by the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. My name is Meredith Farsani. I am the Training and Outreach Specialist at the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MCASA for short. MCASA is the federally recognized state sexual assault coalition. We represent the state's 17 rape crisis centers, as well as other professionals in the state that work with survivors. We also house the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, which provides legal services to survivors of sexual assault in Maryland. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We have enabled closed captioning for today's training, and you can choose to activate those captions by clicking on the live transcript button. You can then make the captions appear as subtitles within the Zoom window or in the chat bar to the right of the Zoom window. We also have ASL interpreters with us today. They have been spotlighted for you all to view, but you can pin them to your screen if needed by clicking on the 3 dots in the top right corner of the interpreter's screen. Participants are in listen-only mode, meaning you won't be able to unmute yourselves throughout today's presentation, just to avoid background noise because we are recording today's session. So please use the chat for any questions you have. We encourage everyone to ask questions. We do want this to be an interactive session through the chat. We will be monitoring that throughout for any questions, and if we have time at the end, we can answer questions then. Lastly, we do have an evaluation survey for you all to fill out. We greatly appreciate the feedback you have for this program. We are also offering CEUs for today's presentation for Maryland social workers. So if you do need CEUs or a certificate of attendance, you must fill out the evaluation in order to access that information. That survey will be put in the chat towards the end, and it also will be sent out in a follow-up email. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea Hood, MCASA's Underserved Populations Policy Advocate and Training Assistant, to introduce today's speaker.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I will be introducing Tina Frundt. Ms. Frundt has been actively raising awareness of the commercial sexual exploitation of children since 2000. She is the founder and executive director of Courtney's House, which provides direct services for domestic sex trafficked males and females between the ages of 11 to 24 years old in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Since its inception, Courtney's House and Ms. Frundt have helped over 2,000 survivors get out of their trafficking situation. A high-profile national advocate on the issue of domestic sex trafficking and a survivor of CSEC, Ms. Frundt is deeply committed to helping other children and youth who are living through experiences similar to her own. She has been featured on numerous national shows and publications, including the OWN Network's Our America with Lisa Ling, 3 a.m. Girls, which featured an undercover look into sex trafficking in Washington, D.C.
May you speak a little bit slower for the interpretation, please? Thank you.
Yes, sorry about that. The CNN Freedom Project, and in 2016, the Whitney Young Unsung Heroes Award by the Urban Institute. In 2010, she became the first U.S. citizen to receive the Free the Slaves Freedom Awards Frederick Douglass Award, which recognizes survivors of sex trafficking who use their lives in freedom to help others. And in 2016, she was appointed by President Obama to the first White House Survivor Advisory Board. And lastly, she has testified before the U.S. Congress about her own experiences and the need for greater protection and services for trafficked persons. It is my great pleasure to introduce Tina Frundt.
Thank you very much. And thank you all so much for joining today. I do want everyone to know that I am very interactive. So I'm going to ask you questions, and it's okay to drop the answers, and there are no wrong answers because you don't know the answer. And so that's okay, into the chat. And if you have questions for me, I promise you, I want to get to those. If you're like me, I can't wait to the end. So please go ahead and drop those in. So first, I want to really explain a little bit more about Courtney's house. So I'm excited today about that. So Courtney's house is based in Washington, D.C., and we've been around since 2008. I've been working on the issue for about 20 years, and I first started all the direct services programs at Polaris Project, and then I started Courtney's house in 2008. So I really want to talk about first our services at Courtney's house, and then we're going to talk about what we see, and then different approaches as well. So Courtney's house is built off of my life, what happened to me, but what would have been great if I was provided services. So my trafficking situation started at 9 years old inside of foster care. And then later, so that's first family control, when I was 13, meeting a pimp and having that being pimp control. So before we get into all the forms and different types of trafficking, let's talk about kind of why I started Courtney's house. So Courtney's house has always started off with working with boys, girls, and LGBTQI community, always have been. I've been out bisexual since I was 12 years old. And so all these focuses was something that I felt that was really necessary to have. Now, in 2008, I first started Courtney's house with the age of 13. So our ages were 13 to 18 years old at that time. And then 2 years went by and I changed that. And then it was 13 to 21. And then a few more years went by. And then we kept it here in DC. 24 is youth. So that means that they can get homeless services, especially for youth. And so I kept it at 24, but every year I was lowering the age. So Courtney's house last year, I would have told you we were 11 to 24, but we are licensed through foster care and we are 9 to 24 at Courtney's house with an average age of about 12 to 17 years old. So I want to talk about that and also like the lowering of ages. Let's talk about what that really means. I have a physical address, so I actually have a drop-in center. Now, this is the test to see if you're listening. What is a drop-in center to you when I say that word? Go ahead, drop that in the chat for me. I said we have a drop-in center. And what is a drop-in center to you when you hear that word in reference to youth? Oh, I love these responses already. A place where you can walk in, no appointment necessary, where you can drop off children, open 24 hours. I love these responses. And let me explain a little bit more about that. So I like words. You're going to get this one about me. And then I like a little twist to the words and come up with a different meaning. And so a drop-in center. So at Courtney's house, we only serve sex trafficking survivors, not at risk, not maybe. I actually confirmed for the city. I serve all of DC, all of Maryland, all of Virginia, and then nationally. We'll talk about that. And so what that really means here is that we confirm you for if you're trafficked. And here's the reason why I want to start on that part first. A lot of drop-in centers, a lot of different services. You work with people who may be, not all the way in the life of traffic, right? They may be at risk. Not here. And the reason why I focus on that is so this is what I tell youth when they come in, right? And the staff. This is a place where we are all in the same boat, honey. So how I'm going to talk about you if I'm in the same boat with you, because it's getting tight in this boat. This boat a little tight. And that's really the way to explain it once to youth, but also understand when we mix it, right? And we don't have the luxury of just serving one particular population, especially when they're sex trafficked, then what actually happens is you have a lot of teasing, you have a lot of putting down. And so we wanted a place, right, where you're definitely not going to get judged and everyone really, really has similar experiences. So that's one. This is not a place where anybody can walk in because you have to be a part of Courtney's house first. So if you are a part of Courtney's house, yes, we do have hours. We are not 24 hours. I wish we was. I've been working on it. We have a physical house. So this is not an office space. So no, they don't live here. But this is a physical house though. It is. And it's a confidential location because of all the different and various trauma that they do have, right? So there are a few things within this drop-in center that might make it a little different. One, a lot of our youth go to school. So right now it's kind of quiet. It won't be, give me an hour. It's not going to be quiet because we have tons of youth that are coming in after school. So that kind of brings perspective about the ages that I'm talking about. And if I said school, and that surprises you. So most of our kids go to school. The reason why we're not housing, and most of our youth have housing because they're in foster care. And so a lot of our youth are also not in foster care as well. And so the services also includes a full food program. So we have real meals here from scratch. I don't do canned products or anything. So we serve meals and we have family discussions. We do not say a social worker, a case manager here, but we have them. We call them SSC, Survivor Services Coordinator. And really years ago when Courtney's house first opened, the survivors picked their own name of what they wanted that to be called because they're more than a case. So everything here is a choice, even being in the program. Once you're part of the program, we say, welcome to the family. Now, all these wording and languages, all for a reason. Stay with me. You're going to love the reason. Because we have to show them what a positive family is. And so that I don't have recruitment at Courtney's house, which I don't. We also have to have a very close-knit, right? Even though we have 73 people, we have to be close-knit within our family. So within that, we also have support groups that meet on Saturdays. I said Saturdays. Guess what? We're open on Saturdays. I think that's important because a lot of services, especially for youth and especially for trauma, aren't open on Saturdays. And so we are. And then our support groups are called Transitioning Your Mindset Out of the Life. There are words we don't use. And number one word would be rescue. And let me explain why. Because I can't rescue you. This is a transition of a mind that you have to make conscious choices and decisions. I can pull you out of something and say, oh, I rescued you and I saved you. I think that's kind of selfish on that person because then that person who was rescued feels like I owe you something. That's going to be number one. And number two, it puts all this thing on not this person. Understand, just because you're out of the situation doesn't mean the trauma has stopped, right? And that's a transition. So I think that's really important to know. So I want to go back very quickly to the services quickly and talk about that. And then we'll go into our next piece. And so when we're talking about services, we have one-on-ones. So listen to the word I just told you, one-on-ones, which is counseling. We focus on the sex trafficking. There are therapists who we work with who may not even be at Courtney's house. They already may have counseling services, and that's fine. We work with them, and that we focus on the trafficking. Okay, and so we call it one-on-ones. Youth love one-on-ones. If you call it counseling, child, we'd be here all day trying to beg them to go. But a one-on-one, you get to actually pick the topic. We all connected back to trafficking. It starts off at 30 minutes. It's not really 30 minutes. It always ends at 45, but we let them start off at 30 and let them kind of see how they feel and if they want to continue. So what in reality happens is that they pick their days and times when they come in. And a lot of times they want to hurry up and tell you a one-on-one, or they'll call it the tea. They're like, let me tell you my tea. So we'll ask them to sign up when they're at the center so we can keep a tight schedule. I want to explain that a little bit too. So now let's talk about their other services. So within that, 100% of all of our youth, right, were sexually assaulted. But let's talk about that in different capacities of the word. So when it can be many different ways. But the number one way we're going to start off with is that they are under the age of 18. And even if there was no traditional trafficker, the men who are buying sex for them, let's be very clear, are raping them. And they're raping them because they're grown adults and these are children. So I want to be very, very clear. So when someone says, this is my choice, and they're 16 or 17, and they're telling you, this is my choice, it could not possibly be because it's grown men. They're not having sex. 17-year-olds, I'm buying sex from them. It's grown men. So I want us to put that in perspective. And then the other way, right? The other piece to that. Say they're 27 and they came in for sexual assault services only. But then they tell you that when they were 12 or 11 or 13, they entered the life. We don't call it trafficking, we say the life. So I'm going to use that terminology. And they entered the life. So that was trafficking, right? It was, because once again, it was grown men buying sex from a child. So I just want to kind of explain that. I think sometimes we always think it has to be this other controller when they are a child, but that is not true. So I just want to get that understood there. And right, so I love that comment. They said having sex with a minor cannot be consensual. There you go, exactly. So we want to be clear that. So let's go back to some fun things. So listen, when I say I work with youth, I could not possibly just have like counseling all day long. That's crazy. So we do have fun activities and we do have unique ways to get them to focus on like the counseling in school. We're also involved in school. And so that can be having their access code online, helping them with their school homework as well. There's a lot of many different levels. The next piece would be children. So our youth having children. So of course, our facility, our house is set up for that. So we have beds, they can bring their kids here for them. We have hot chairs, plenty of clothing and other things and needs they may need for their children as well. But many of our youth are 14 to 15 years old who's pregnant right now. We are also doing a baby shower for 4 youth, and all of them except for one. Well, that one is only 18. The rest are all under the age of 16. So I do want us, and maybe this is their second child. So I do also want to understand about that. Now I want to quickly talk about the forms of sex trafficking, and then we'll connect things on how people come to us. So there are really 4 forms of sex trafficking. So let's go through those. You've heard the most about pimp control. We will talk about gang control. Then we're going to talk about the individuals that we believe is doing it on their own and what that is, right? In connection with the boys as well. And then family control. And so, or familiar control, same thing. So I want to tell you what we see the most, and that's how we do the forms of sex trafficking. You know, doing this for many, many, many years, people actually say a few things to me. They usually say like, things probably change so much now, right? That everything is online and you know, it's hard to keep up. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. It wouldn't be true, because that wouldn't be a good business plan if that was true. If everything was online, sweetheart, that's not a business plan. Think about how you shop. Some of us, like me, like I like the theory of online shopping. Don't get me wrong. I love the theory. I got a million apps of online shopping. I love the theory of. And I say the theory because I love to put things in my cart all day long. Cart. But they in there. Yup. Because I didn't get to try them on. So I actually like going into stores. And when I like going into these stores, right, I like to try on things. And that's the type of shopper I am. Now, let's use this analogy, right, into trafficking. There are men who buy sex that like to be on the street. They call themselves, it's a name for it, and the name is mongers, MONGERS, mongers. And yep, it's a real thing. And they say they like the prowl, right, of being out, and they call it a hunt, hunting a prey and buying a person. That's their thing. And then there is another set of people that like to purchase their people online and then meet up with them. But all of these things is the business plan. And so Courtney's house has a group chat with our youth on an Instagram. It's a private group chat. And the reason why we do that is because we follow our youth and could really see what's going on and the realities of what's happening. So my point is this. The number one form of sex trafficking, what do you guys think we see the most at Courtney's house? The most. So like right now, our youth, let's go over those categories. So is it pimp control? Is it family? Is it game? Is it like individual? What do you think it is? Oh, I love my answers. You all are smart. And I'm going to say the number one that I am seeing is family. Let's talk about it. It has always been that way, and you are right. It is correct. Family control has always been number one. Unfortunately, so let's talk about that. At Courtney's house, what are our numbers? 56% of our youth are trafficked by their families. Before the pandemic, it was 42%. And I think that's really important because there are a few ways, and I want to talk about that a few ways. Usually people tell me the number one way, which would they say is drugs, maybe because of drugs. Okay, so drugs is definitely one way, but then you have intergenerational. And I see a lot of grandparents that are not on drugs. So the grandparent isn't on drugs, and they are also still trafficking the children. This is the hardest one. And the reason why it's the hardest one, right? Because it's like abuse within the family. The children recant because it is their family. And people may not believe them, and their family threatens them. And so they recant it. So I would definitely say the number one. Now, the next piece of that family piece that is difficult is that the youth have other family members. And so because of that, they try to save, if you would say, their own siblings. But that save, right, is really saying, no, take me instead of them. So at Courtney's house, we have a lot of siblings. I have about, 7 or 8, 9 different sets. So some twins, right? We have the brothers, and then we'll have the sister. We have the younger, and it may be this way. And so maybe we have this younger other family that we have with young people where the mom was in a life and the dad was a pimp. And then they have 4 children. And then all of them they put in the life. It can also be that. We also have where the dad was a pimp. And then they put them in the life as well. Now I got a question for you about that. All of you all have this correct answer, right? A family. But really, why don't we hear that talked about on the news? What we hear on news and on TikTok, oh my goodness, is this big old white van, and we hear heavy, heavy, heavy pimp control. but not the realities of what we're actually seeing. So let's go back and connect this to sexual assault. Because all of our youth, right? Not only was there sexual assault a play, but many of the abuse first started in the home. So sexual abuse in the home, family members, and even outside. And so I really want to focus on that because our youth, right? And even myself have family control, but then was also sexually assaulted, right? Many times before. And so let me explain a few things. The shame of being in the life. Because the minute a sexual assault does occur, our youth always say, it's my it's my fault because I shouldn't have been doing this. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have been doing this. And that goes to not even understanding, right, what sexual assault is. Because I really want to talk about that. Is we have to educate our youth in our program of what it even is. Because if sexual assault was happening to you since you was 9 the whole time, it's normalized. And you actually don't really understand what it is. You don't understand that it's not okay for grown men to have sex because grown men tell you this. You look older for your age. And our youth believe that. And they tell you that to make themselves feel better, but our youth believe that. Now, I think that's really important because it puts all these blames and things in your head for not really understanding what sexual assault is. And it's always, you're absolutely right, Samantha. It's easier to blame an outside force. So let's talk about that. I'm glad you brought that up, Samantha, because let's talk about our boys. Most of our boys at Courtney's house do not define as LGBT at all. So they define as straight. And I think that's important because I hear many presentations and many people thinking that it's mostly our girls and not the boys. Now with the boys, why don't you see these cases on TV and the newspaper? I am going to tell you very sadly that I've talked to many, 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 many parents. And unfortunately, this always happens where they're the ones that are refusing to go forward with the case. They're telling their son not to because they don't want people to think that their son was gay. No, seriously. And so I'm thinking we have this other issue we don't want to talk about amongst sexual assault amongst boys and men. And the other stigma, because working with boys, here they don't have an issue. Nobody teases them. In the outside world, they have to pretend to be something that they're not, right? Especially when I'm telling you that some of my boys are 6'4", wear a size 15 shoe. And then also was abuse. And I want to talk about the boys for a moment, and because their situations are a little different. So one of our boys came to me. The great thing about Courtney's house is that we are a long-term program. So I don't have like a time to close a case, right? And so we've had him for 2 years. And he first came in because a therapist, we found out, was not only having sex with him, right? But selling him to others. And I said a therapist that was actually referred through foster care. This therapist was Caucasian and he adopted African-American boys. He literally, these mothers were on drugs and he gave them maybe $100 or so to adopt their child. So people at first were saying how such a great guy he was. And then things started to change when some of the boys were saying, remind you, he's a therapist, that they knew his home address. Not only did they know his home address, guess what the nice therapist did? Bought a game system. And so we're not talking about sex trafficking yet into this, but what does this sound like to you when I'm telling you he got a game system? He invited grooming other boys, but there's another word we never use. So we learned this new word, you all, and it's called grooming. But how come we forget about the word pedophile? Because, and I say that because look what he was doing. Oh, you guys can come to my house because actually the boys in our program that came from the situation, they didn't have a game system. And none of their families could afford the game system. Thank you. I see someone saying it's non-clinical. That's right. Red flag number 587. But the kids didn't say anything at first about going to his home because he's like, hey, you don't have to say anything. It'll be a safe space for you. I'll get this for you. And they didn't say anything because what? They didn't want to get him in trouble. And so then probably, and I like what I'm hearing, and we all thought that he became a therapist to get close to children as well, Courtney. So I'm really glad that you pointed that out. I want to tell you this. So something started not to sound right. So with getting this contract with foster care, it includes CPS, right? Child and Protective Services and such as well. And a woman didn't get her money, one of the mothers. The man promised her some more money and didn't get that money. And so she called in a hotline report to get him in trouble, even though that was her son. I know. And so because of that, then we learned more that happened with him buying these things and items and then having his friends come over. And those friends gave him the money. Now, here's the thing. At Courtney's house, we have never, ever in our lives, never, ever have I ever asked, have you exchanged money? Have you exchanged, sex for money or items? I've never asked that. You don't ever have to ask that. There'd be no reason to ask that. And so instead, the reason why this came to us is because it sounds like child sexual abuse, but there was another layer. And the regular questions that people are asking really don't determine, right? Especially for boys. So this was a whole red flag for me. So we go a different direction with our intake. We first talked about the game system and what types of games did they play in the game system. I gotta get you comfortable talking to me, man. Explain all games. And then I was like, man, that sounds fun. So he don't have no cameras in the house? Was there cameras? What you mean, like in the living room and stuff? Okay. Yeah, there's cameras. There was cameras in the living room, yeah. Do you see how we asked that? But that question was never asked, right? You do an icebreaker, you do the real question, you go back to fun, you go back to real. Because what happens is if you taught me not to tell nobody anything, then I have pre-recorded answers. That's what we call them. I don't want pre-recorded answers. There are lots of ways to ask lots of things without, right? Asking about sex. The minute you do that, they're gonna shut down and know that they shouldn't say something. So instead, we went a different way. Now, I'm gonna tell you a few things that occurred, and I'm gonna tell you why. So we were actually on the phone. All our kids talk to us on FaceTime, which is why we have iPhones as hotlines at Courtney's house. So we were on FaceTime. Why one of our boys in our program was physically there, right? And we're trying to get him to leave. Guess what? The police did a raid. So when the police finally did a raid, and maybe some of you right now are like, oh my God, finally, they did this raid. Okay. They did a raid and they did find images on the computer. The next day he was out, and the next day other youth were back into his home. So I do want to tell you a few things and why it does go differently. 85% of my youth at Courtney's house is African American, and the other percentage is Latina. And I want to talk about that too for a moment, where we talk about responses and how responses are. Because in that response, what they actually said, even though, right, is the sex trafficking unit. They're like, yeah, but people are giving different information. And yeah, they're not giving us all the information. But the boys are just like the girls who are sex trafficked, you all. He kept telling me, our survivor, this is my friend. He's been nice to me. Now, he was supposed to have a restraining order, which he did, and he was supposed to start communicating with him. But he admitted to us in the beginning, like, I'm still talking to him online. And that would be for the same reason the girls are, right? Because of that control and that manipulation. And you also have to remember something very important someone said in the chat. This man was a therapist, you all. A therapist who, this is how he got the boys in his program. He knew how to manipulate the situation with everybody. So I really want to understand the different situations of trafficking and who are these people. So if you are being sexually abused, right, and you have a therapist, and in that therapy, you're supposed to talk about abuse. How do we think this therapist, we use that word very loosely, even describe this to his prey? And we're going to say his prey, right? Because we all agree that he was definitely preying, and he knew who to target. He targeted African-American boys who he knew parents were on drugs, and he did that on purpose. And I'm telling you all of this to tell you he did not get a trafficking charge. That's what I wanted to tell you. He did not get a trafficking charge. There was some abuse. The images and things got off on probation. And he moved out of the area. So, yep, he lost his license here, yeah. But he lives somewhere. And yes, probation. And I really want to talk about that because that's what really happened to a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, of getting on probation for sex trafficking and abuse allegations and the truth of what was happening. That's the reality, actually. So actually what happened was this. So when our youth are sexually assaulted again, because unfortunately they do not want to testify now because they keep saying, but Miss Tina, nothing ever really happened. They're on probation. They are out. Nothing happened. Why should I keep pursuing? So I really think that's important to really understand. Now, I want to tell you about another incident where we were, kind of going on. So I really want you all to understand what we hear, right? Maybe on TV and what we hear in training versus the reality of what we're seeing. Now, there's a number one way I'm going to talk about that. The other thing that we saw during the pandemic, that it has still stuck around. Now, before the pandemic, for 20 years, I've been yelling at the rooftops that we need to pay attention to our Black and Brown youth being trafficked overseas. People would tell me things like, oh, I talked to this organization and they said that don't happen. Oh, okay. Or they would tell me, because I work with Homeland Security, we really don't see that, Tina. We don't. I definitely have helped with this over the years, but during the pandemic, the one thing, good thing that actually came out of it was that all these youth are in something called Hope Court here in DC that Courtney's house helped create. Hope Court is a specialized court for youth who may be at risk. They may be sex trafficked. They may need services for that. And so if you're in foster care, you need no charge. So it's like regular foster care, but you have more services. And if you're sex trafficked, one of the things I'm trying to do for Maryland is that you can stay in foster care until you're 21. Foster care will not close your case. Not even if you want it closed, will they close it? Because, we know that traffickers force you to get out of care. So with that being said, these youth are in Hope Court. And so that means the OAG's office, Office of Attorney General's office, is also a part of Hope Court for the foster care youth. Now I'm going to tell you the top places that our children, one, inside the United States were being trafficked to. And then we'll go to international and our ages of the youth. So we're going to start with the number 3 spots for boys first. Okay. So we're just going to include it all and definitely say, so our DC people, Virginia, everybody was in Prince George's County. Tons of spots in Prince George's, undercover parties in these apartments where you strip and stuff and they advertise on Instagram. Baltimore. And so, okay, we've done our area. Then it's going to be Atlanta, the Miami, Florida area, and then LA. And the average age of those youth would definitely be between the ages of 13 and 20 years old. Now, internationally, average age will be 13 to 17 years old. The top place was Togo, Africa. Number 2, and don't worry, I'm gonna really explain this in a moment. Number 2 place was Brazil. Number 3 place, Mexico. Now, as I mentioned these places, before I go any further and explain it, I want to know, is anybody surprised about the international perspective of our Black and brown children, both boys and girls, being trafficked overseas? Is this new? Did you think about this before? No surprise. But have we heard of it? It's not a surprise, but have you heard of it? On the news. On the news. Have you heard of it on the news? Read it in the newspaper? And, oh, we got a couple of people. Oh, no news, not the news. Okay, yes, I want to know about the news. Samantha, baby, it doesn't matter if you knew it to the field. They don't talk about it. And so, especially on the news. So let's talk about that and what we had to do and what happened. So during the pandemic, when I say our youth went overseas and was lured to go, let's do it that way, because we were actually able to pull everybody off the plane. So I'll start there. And how do we know and about relationship buildings? So again, it's very, very important to have a relationship, because a relationship gives you information. Not seeing somebody once a week, checking in with them, that doesn't really give you much. It gives you information after the fact. It's not going to give you in real time. Real time means they on FaceTime with you right now and it's active. So now let's also tell you that all the youth, except for one, was in foster care. So all the youth from foster care, we are talking about 8 youth right now. And right now I'm going to focus on the international aspect. So we're talking about 8 internationally between the ages of 13 and 17 years old. So there are a few things that's wrong with this situation. One, I want to tell you a little bit that all those youth are from DC and Prince George's County. None of those youth have ever been, they're all African American, and none of them have ever been really anywhere past Ocean City. Okay, so, or Baltimore, like life, like that's about it. So that's also very important to understand their knowledge base of that. The next thing to know about all the youth is that they didn't all like talk to each other about it or go, they were all individually kind of picked, didn't know people were talking to or another person, wasn't anything like that. So that's also very important to know. Now, the next piece is everyone came to us and said they were going to go on vacation. And you know, I'm me all the time, you all, so the kids know me very well. So I'm always like, okay, the 13-year-old going on vacation. Well, where are we going? Because you're 13. And I also think it's important to know a few things about the youth being in foster care, and even the youth that wasn't in foster care, because they did not have their DC or Prince George's County ID or school ID. They didn't have it. So no one had access to a birth certificate, a social security card, or their ID. They tried to get them from the social workers or from a program or their parent, and I flagged it. So they were not able to get this information. Now, you all, this is during the pandemic. Second year into the pandemic, you remember how hard it was to get a passport? Remember the passport offices and how it was closed? And so how did you even get an ID? So the kids told us, well, the way kids tell you things is I have to guess it, then they tell me about what. So I guessed that they had a fake ID. True. Then each of them, separate times, actually called us. Again, we talked to them all the time on FaceTime. So they called us in front of the passport office building outside. We all noticed different men, not the same men, were in the background of the FaceTime. But when they called us, they had a real passport. I just told you that. Now I got a question for you. I said everyone had a real passport. How to get it? Tell me about it. Drop it to me. We only got a few minutes, so I'm gonna wrap this story up. Drop it to me. How to get the real passport? Anybody know? Are we guessing? Think about it. So when you have a minor, because remember they're minors, everyone I just told you was a minor. Yes, you guys are right. There was an insider. That's right. And so they're minors though. If you're a minor, like you legit need an adult. And so then I guess that person, remember the people I saw in the background, were the ones that were saying that that was their, child or niece. Now, here's the thing. Of course, we flagged this. The OAG office knows we're flagging it to the team. But I'm going to continue and tell you what did not happen. So now we're flagging this. They have a real passport. I know that somebody in that office is getting some money because that's not possible. Now, if we did not have a good relationship, we wouldn't be able to tell you the next pieces to this because we talked to all the youth when they were on their way to the airport. Remember, they're not together. We talked to them all when they were on their way to that airport. And I want you to know the airport, we're in an area that we have 3 airports, right? We got BWI, we got Dulles, and then we have DCA. But all the youth were taken to JFK Airport by an Uber. I said JFK Airport from this area by Uber. Tell me why. All African-American youth. Now, of course, they're doing that, right? Right. No trace. They know they're minors. What if they say something to somebody? What if they're looking for them? Now, here's the thing. They didn't know about us. None of the youth, back to relationship building, are telling anybody about us. That's amazing. And that way, we're still able to try to talk them out of this. Now, they didn't listen. Let's talk about the airports. So everybody go to the airport, separate times, separate days, not together. So they're at the airport, one of our youth. And guess what? So now we are in real time. OAG office tonight, she's calling Homeland Security, TSA, and then for foster care, so you all know this. Foster care, for us to share the picture, especially to like TSA, Homeland Security, you actually have to have an emergency court hearing, which we were able to do immediately so that you can show the picture and give the information to them. So this was expedited. And so we were able to do that. Here's the issue. Now, I just told you all about kids. Now, I travel all the time. Internationally, everything. I get people ask me questions all the time about where I'm going, the address. None of the youth were asked this question either. Everybody got on the plane. That's what I said. Everybody got on the plane. Nobody was stopped. Not one person. Didn't happen. Everybody was pulled off the plane, thankfully, by TSA. TSA did pull them off the plane. Everyone was left at JFK Airport. Everybody. They pulled them off the plane and they literally just left. So they called us. They had to call their social worker. We had to find ways. Remember, social workers turn off their phone at 4:30. So we had to go get them. 2 of the youth were actually re-trafficked by meeting people at JFK Airport. And it took us 2 weeks for one to get back. And then it took me about 3.5 weeks to get the 14-year-old back. And so to this day, our judge ordered, what is going on? How come no one is researching this? Obviously, there is somebody at the office, but I'm going to ask you all again. Yes, we got them off, but they were left. Any other time, right? Homeland Security, TSA, they interview and figure out what happened. But all our kids was just left there. Now I'm going to ask you this question about Black and brown, because that's what I told you. Why? One time, okay, we hope it doesn't happen a second. Twice, 3, 4, I told you this happened 8 times, all JFK Airport. Everybody was just pulled off, nothing happened. Yep, you said it. Racism because of their color. And I want you to think about that. On what the real differences are when we see and hear on TV about a trafficking survivor versus what they're saying, like the case we're currently working on, have been working on for the last year, Piper Lewis, that many of you all heard on TV, but we've been working with Piper Lewis for over a year. And I can tell you she was 15 years old. She was held by knife point by a man that was 38 years old. And he forced her to drink a bottle of tequila. And she did, passed out. He raped her for hours, anally and vaginally. Passed out from raping her. She woke up, saw what happened. She stabbed him 30 times, the 15-year-old. And she's been in jail since. She had a pimp. That was a man who bought sex from her, a trick. And I'm pointing this out. Yes, and you can look that up, Latanya, the Piper Lewis case. And I'm talking about this because it happens to us all the time. And the treatment really is different. Piper Lewis wasn't even taken to the hospital, you all. There was no rape kit. She said she was bleeding vaginally and anally, and the police did not take her one time to the hospital for a rape kit. They took her to jail and charged her. And she was a child, and she was raped and trafficked. And now we're hearing about it because of the sentencing, right? And so the knowledge of what we're doing. The reason why Courtney's House works on a lot of policy is because, I'm just going to say it, the policy isn't really policy put in place that are really here to help Black and brown youth for none of this happening. It's not there. We don't have that protection. And so we have to do so much. And I'm glad you all said, this makes my skin boil. But guess what? That's why Courtney's House has to do so much. We have to train. We have to do policy. We have to work with the minors. You have to work with adults and change on that and understand how. Of course, sexual assault has always been weaved into sex trafficking, always in this. But the minute, right, we put sex trafficking on top and say it was sex trafficking, it was sexual assault, that's the problem. Now you leave it alone. And in this situation of Piper Lewis, right, who was raped and sex trafficked, the minute this came onto play and they realized, which you can't tell me they didn't realize what was going on, they still arrested and charged her. And she never even got to heal. And unfortunately, she had some permanent damage. They never took her to the hospital, you all. This young girl was a child, right, that was raped for hours, and they never took her to the hospital. And this just happened a couple years ago. And just a month ago, we pulled another child off of the plane going overseas. So I'm telling you all of this. So when we are trying to figure out, is it sex trafficking, sexual assault, we have more knowledge, right? Than this smaller knowledge of what we think trafficking would be. Now we have more information and different ways that it may cross over that maybe you weren't aware of before and know now. I'm going to encourage everyone, don't you get to the GoFundMe. Please, please don't. Read it. If you read the GoFundMe, the teacher who put up the GoFundMe, if you read that, there's a name in there that says it goes to a family. That's not, Piper doesn't have a family. Her last name is Lewis. The family that he wants to send the rest of the money to is the man, yep, that raped her and trafficked her. They want that money will go to his family. So please don't give to that GoFundMe account. Right. Once again, an opportunity. Yes, I met the teacher when I was in Iowa, and he's definitely an opportunist and could care less about poor Piper, who was a straight A student, who mother who adopted her signed away her rights when this charge came up. And Piper was missing for 8 months, and her mother never put out a missing persons report, not one time. None of that money will go to Piper. So I thank you all so much, man, just for being here, listening, being so active when it's very different, right? This type of training, but you all were just right there, active, answering the questions. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tina, for that presentation and for speaking to all of us today. You were just so amazing to hear speak. I've never met such an engaging presenter before without a PowerPoint. So I was thrilled to hear you. I know everyone else, there's tons of thank yous in the chat. Before folks head out, I want to turn things over to Demir Sayakui. He is our human trafficking policy attorney over at the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, who's going to talk to you a little bit about Maryland's resources.
Thank you for that. Yeah, let's do a quick little outro. I just wanted to kind of focus on 2 things that you all can receive help. One is through Sally. We do provide free pro bono services to victims of sexual assault. We try our best to help them. If they can remotely qualify, we do whatever we can. With that, I am also the trafficking attorney. With that, we have something called the Coordinated Action Against Sex Trafficking. What it does is we try to help the helpers. If somebody has somebody that needs help or they need a resource in a part of the state they're unfamiliar with, that's what we're here for. We work throughout the state. We have friends, coalitions across the state. We want to put them in contact with the people that need help. In addition, if you need research or if you need to figure out how to get someone to obtain legal services, we can do that as well. That's at Sally. That would be me or other attorneys directly doing that. Second part I wanted to just touch on was the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force. Maryland does have a fairly robust task force. It is broken up into subcommittees. Anyone can join. Join a subcommittee that means something to you or you want to help with. The main ones is the victim services, which I'm a part of. It's probably my favorite. That's people all throughout the state getting together and figuring out how can we help. There's a legislative subcommittee, which is how can we petition Annapolis to help. There's public awareness, is what its name says. It tries to bring forth awareness to this issue. Training, that's mostly for law enforcement and mental health providers. But those trainings are also through us, free for CCLUs. And then there's law enforcement. We want to always help train law enforcement, make sure they have up-to-date information to be trauma-informed. We need to make sure that they're receiving the best training. And then the most recent is labor trafficking. It's a little bit different outside of this realm, but it's intertwined. A lot of people who are sex trafficked are also receive labor trafficking. If you're curious, I'll get the website. For that is mdhumantrafficking.org, or if you just Google Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force, it's the first thing that pops up. like I said, it's easy to join the meetings. Most of them meet monthly or bi-monthly. We have people all throughout the state, and people, that's many of resources that I use have come through just making those connections. If anybody has any questions, I'll put my information in the chat. You can just email me directly. Thank you again, Tina. Always love watching you present. You're so engaged. Well, it makes me happy that so many more people can see you present and see your passion for this topic.
Thank you so much for that. And I did put my email in the chat.
I've gone ahead and put the evaluation and CEU form. Please fill that out. We really appreciate your feedback for this program. I'll be sharing all the evaluation data with Tina. So continue to leave your thanks and positive messages there as well. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, but I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.